Hello everybody and welcome back to another video. Today we are going to be taking a look at the leveling guide for the Sorcerer. Now I recently have been leveling up Sorcerer since patch 1.1.1, since Sorcerer got all of the buffs. And when I looked online, I couldn't find really any leveling guides out there, and so I took it upon myself to make one for you guys so you guys can try Sorcerer too. So with that, let's jump right into the build. Alright, something a little bit different in this build, we're going to start with the aspects first, as there's really only two aspects you need for this build. Now in this build, we'll be covering from level 1 to level 50. That means there's going to be no Paragon board. And with that, I only wanted to use the bare minimum for aspects. I'm not going to slot every single piece because really leveling 1 through 50, you're going to be changing your armor so often that it's not worth it to put aspects in it. Now the jewelry, however, you can keep the jewelry from level 5 if you want all the way to level 50, and it really is not going to make that much of a difference as your jewelry doesn't scale as much as your armor. So with that, that's why I have two aspects in our jewelry. If you really want to, you could put a third aspect in here, but really these two are the only ones required to make the build work. And starting off with aspect of the Unbroken Tether. Chain Lightning has a 30 to 40% chance to chain 4 additional times. And now most likely you're going to be imprinting this, so you're going to have the lowest amount, 30%. But this is still incredibly strong as our main damage is Chain Lightning, as it is incredibly strong right now. Now overall, this is a great skill, basically just going to make it so that we do a ton more damage with our Chain Lightning, making it chain even more. As we move down here into Recharging Aspect, this is just to help with our mana regeneration. Each time Chain Lightning bounces, you gain 1.5 to 3 mana. Now again, this is most likely going to be imprinted since we are very low level, and so you're just going to get 1.5 mana. Now this is pretty good, seeing as our previous aspect makes it chain 4 additional times, and it already chains in the base skill, so we're going to be getting quite a bit of mana from just casting this into a big pack. Overall, this really helps with our mana regeneration. This early on in the build, without other aspects, we will not have permanent mana, and that is something that can be a little frustrating on this leveling build, but once you learn to play with it and use your other skills, overall it actually is really nice, and it clears extremely fast. I took this build from level 1 all the way to level 50 in about 2 hours and 30 minutes. Now I do have a strategy that I found that is absolutely amazing for leveling alts, so if you guys want to see that, let me know in a comment down below and I can make a video showing you guys how to solo level your alts. Yes, I leveled this character completely solo from level 0 to level 50 in 2.5 hours. And I'll show you guys how to do it too if you want. So leave that down below if you want to see that. Alright, now moving on here to the actual skills we're going to be using. Arc Lash, Chain Lightning, Ice Armor, Frost Nova, Teleport, and Unstable Currents. And then of course we have our level 15 enchantment, Fireball, and our Chain Lightning. Now we're going to go into those further, but let's take a look at the skill board first. Alright, getting started here on the skill tree, we can see that we start out with Arc Lash and then into Enhanced Arc Lash, so over here. And then we're going to move down and get our Chain Lightning first. And the reason is Chain Lightning is our main damaging skill. So we're going to go down here and grab Chain Lightning. Then we're going to go back up real quick and grab Glintering Arc Lash. Now this is really important. It helps to reduce our cooldowns and it also stuns enemies. After that, of course, we move down here and grab our 2 passives for our Chain Lightning, Enhanced and Greater Chain Lightning. Now the reason we choose Greater here instead of Critical Strikes is this early on we're not going to be doing any Critical Strikes really. We don't have anything built up to prop up our Critical Strike chance, and so really it's not really worth it to use this. You know, once you have, more Critical Strike chance as you build up and level up, it's definitely okay to switch to this because you'll be doing some crackling energy damage, and there's some really cool aspects you can pair with this to do some pretty cool stuff. Now of course this is just a leveling build, so we're not going to cover that here. But I am working on an absolutely amazing in-game Sorcerer build, so stay tuned for that and hope to see it next week. Now after all that, we're going to go get some defensive skills, starting with Teleport and then into Ice Armor. After we grab those, we're going to go ahead and put some points into our Teleport, into Enhanced and then Shimmering, and then finally we're going to go down to Frost Nova and get our Enhanced and our Mystic Frost Nova. Now around this time, you're about to unlock your first enchantment slot, so we need to go back up to Fireball, get Fireball, get our Enhanced, and then get our Destructive Fireball so it does more damage. And then we're going to move on to our first passive, which is going to be Glass Cannon, and then we're going to move on here and start with some defensive passives, starting out with Align the Elements. We're going to put 1 point in here and then 1 point in Mana Shield and Protection, and we will be maxing these out a little bit later. Now at this point in the build, I would recommend maxing out Chain Lightning just to get the maximal amount of damage possible. Now as you're doing this, I would max out Chain Lightning and then max out Fireball next, because when you're maxing out Fireball, you're going to unlock your second enchantment slot, which is where I would slot Chain Lightning. Now, after you max out Fireball, we're going to go max out our defensive passives, as around the level 30 range, enemies start to get quite a bit harder. So we're going to 3 out of 3 our Mana Shield and our Protection, and then we're going to go down, we're going to completely skip this tree, and we're going to go and unlock our ultimate ability, Unstable Currents. And we're going to go ahead and unlock all 3. And you just want to use this when you're with a huge pack of mobs. Basically, it's just going to help you destroy entire rooms super easy. It's going to make your clear times much faster. And for the leveling build, I do like to use all 3. In the full build, and when it's actually completed, when you're in the end game, we will not be using the Supreme, as it's not really worth it later in the game. But for the leveling build, Supreme is absolutely amazing. Now, after here, we're going to go unlock our passive real quick. Close enemies take 15% increased damage from your shock skills and deal 20% less damage to you. Critical strikes increase these bonuses by 25% for 3 seconds. This is a great passive for us to have, and at this point in the build, we're starting a little bit to build our critical strike chance, and we're going to focus on that a little bit more. So after that, we're going to go into Cursing Currents. Hitting enemies with shock skills increase your critical strike chance by 1%. Resets upon getting a critical strike. Now this can be really nice. Overall, it's not super important. We're only going to put 1 point in it because really these are more important and better. So another defensive skill, enemies deal 15% less damage to you for 5 seconds after being critically struck by your shock skills. You know, having more defense on a sorcerer is super important, as they can be incredibly squishy, but they do high damage, making them kind of the glass cannon of the characters in Diablo 4. Next, we're going to move on to Convulsions. Shock skills have a 9% chance to stun enemies for 3 seconds. This is really nice because if enemies are stunned, they're not attacking you, basically giving us some more damage, because stunned enemies take a little bit more damage thanks to some passives that we have and future aspects, and they're not attacking you during the same time, so more survivability. Overall, this is really nice to have, and seeing we're doing so much shock damage, this procs all the time. Now at this point, we're going to move up here and put the rest of our points into Frost Nova so that we can get this faster and that it lasts a little bit longer. And then we're going to move on into Devastation. Now we're just going to put 1 point into Devastation, really just to get to Elemental Dominance. Your core and mastery skills deal 9% increased damage when cast above 50 mana. Now at this point, you're going to have a lot more mana, preservation in the game, hopefully. And with this, you should always be doing this increased damage. Really, you want to cast Chain Lightning until you're right at 50, and then you want to let it rebuild for a second. Switch to Arc Lash, do a couple hits of Arc Lash, and then go back to Chain Lightning. That's the kind of playthrough. Eventually, we won't use Chain Lightning at all, because eventually we'll be able to have a 100% uptime mana. Now, this is really nice eventually, but in the leveling build, it's just not possible without slotting other aspects, which really doesn't make sense while you're leveling, since you get so much new gear all of the time. Now, after we get our Elemental Dominance, we're going to go down here and get our Elemental Attunement. Critical strikes have a 15% chance to reset the cooldowns of one of your defensive skills. This can happen 1 every 10 seconds. Now, this is super nice because defensive skills count as Ice Armor, Teleport, and Frost Nova, so we have quite a few. And this is really nice. Frost Nova, especially when it gets reset and you can cast it and keep enemies vulnerable, super nice to have. Again, with Ice Armor, Ice Armor is a very nice barrier that forms around us and overall gives us a ton of survivability. Now, to round off the final points we have, we're just going to put them into Ice Armor, but that is the level 1 through 50 guide. Now, at this point, at level 50, you do really need to change this build, as this is a strong build, and you could probably take it to level 60 or 70 with a good Paragon board, but really it's time to switch it up, because now we can do some really cool thing with aspects, as we're not going to be switching gear as much. So I'm currently working on that build, and hopefully to have it out soon. Now that is going to wrap up the skill tree. Now let's take a look at our abilities and how we're actually going to use them in the game. So first we have our Arc Lash. This is basically, we're going to be using Arc Lash when we are close to 50% or lower mana, so that we keep our damage increased. So we're going to use Chain Lightning as our main source of damage, and this is super nice, especially currently combined with Fireball and the Chain Lightning passives. Once you get to level 30, it just can entirely slay entire rooms. The chaining effect from Fireball is absolutely insane, and overall it is super nice to have. Now, one thing about Ice Armor is it kind of has 2 things for us. Because of the modifier we chose, we deal 25% increased mana regeneration. Now, I like to use Ice Armor in 2 ways. If an elite jumps on me and I'm about to die, obviously pop your Ice Armor to save your life. But if you are low on mana, you can also use Ice Armor to help regenerate faster. Now, so it kind of has two purposes here. Now, it can kind of mess you up if you use it for mana regeneration and then an elite jumps on you and you don't have a barrier to pop. So just keep that in mind when using it. Overall, barrier comes first and then mana regeneration. Now, with Frost Nova, we're going to be using this on as many enemies as we can because it's going to make them vulnerable and make us do much more damage to them. You definitely want to be using it on elites and bosses, and overall try and get to the biggest pack of mobs that you can before you pop it. Now, thanks to it being 5 out of 5 and our cooldown reduction from quite a few things, it should be active a lot, and you want to be using it as much as possible, so don't let it sit there. Try and use it as fast as you can. Now, we're going to be using teleport pretty much on cooldown because of the 30% damage reduction we get when we teleport. Now, we can teleport into enemies and also get a cooldown reduction, but overall you have to be careful doing that because it can lead to your sudden death. Now, basically use teleport to get out of dangerous situations and keep it up as often as you can. With our cooldown reduction stats, it's going to be super, super nice to have. And then, of course, we have unstable elements. This is going to be your room clearing skill. You pop it and then you use these two and just absolutely decimate anything in sight. It will absolutely shred elites, shred bosses, kill entire rooms super easily, and it's just going to make it for those tricky situations when you're fighting 3 or 4 elites a lot safer and overall a lot easier. Now, there is one thing I do want to note in this build, and for our weapon slot, we want to be using a staff in our weapon slot and a focus in our offhand slot. And this is going to give us better lucky hit chance and cooldown reduction. The main thing being cooldown reduction is more important right now. Eventually, lucky hit will also be very important, but not in the leveling build. Now, for our enchantments, like I said, we are going to be using the Fireball at 50%, at level 15, and the Chain Lightning at level 30. Now, these two, I do believe, are the best enchantments for leveling. We're actually going to change both of these in the endgame build, but for leveling, this is what you want to do. Now, I did leave all of these blank because they're not necessary. If you get a legendary to drop that works for your class, throw it on there for sure, but you don't need it. And don't be afraid to take off legendaries in the armor slot for better pieces of yellow gear. Especially in the weapon slot, you always want to be using the highest damage wand that you have. Again, you might have a two-hander that's more powerful, but I would highly recommend to keep it a wand and a focus. Now, one other thing that we did not focus in this build, and that is hearts. And the reason is because I wanted to keep this build focused for any season. And that's because this build is incredibly strong without them. All of the gameplay that I've shown in this video is without using any hearts and without using any gems. That's because I want to future-proof it for future seasons. Now, if you do want to use hearts in this build, that's totally fine, as you should get them while you level up. And the ones I recommend are the Tal Rasha, which basically gives you increased damage for however many elements you're using. Now, with our build, you should always have 2 elements active as we are using lightning and fire. And now when you use the ice skills, you'll actually have all 3 getting the maximum amount of damage out of this. Overall, this is a really nice one to have, and especially in the endgame build, this is going to be a massive damage. Now, the other one I like to use basically gives us critical strikes electrically charge the enemy for 3.25 to 5 seconds, causing lightning to arc between them and any other charged enemies, dealing lightning damage. Now, this can be super nice as we are going to have incredibly high critical strike chance in this build once you get to a higher level. Now, in the beginning, this isn't going to be as useful, so slot it at your own risk. And do keep in mind that if you get a perfect roll, hearts can only be slotted once, so be careful putting them in really low level jewelry because you might want them later on for the endgame build. Now, and if you do have a Wrathful this early in the game, which is unlikely, but if you do, the Barber, of course, is the best Wrathful heart for this build and pretty much for every build out there, even with the changes they made in patch 1.1.2. So with that, that is going to wrap up the Sorcerer leveling guide. Now, again, I hope you guys enjoyed this. This was super fun for me to level 1 through 50, and I really, really enjoyed it. Now, if you guys want to see some more leveling guides, or if you guys want to see the level 50 and plus endgame build for Sorcerer, stay tuned because that video will be coming out soon. So with that, thank you everybody, and if you enjoyed, don't forget to like and subscribe, and I hope to see you guys in a future video. Peace out.